The idea of starting a parallel organization with a broader outreach than I'd ever had before. It started to occur to me several years ago, but it came into focus very strongly in this last year when I had time away, when I'd stepped off the trampoline, as it were, of fairly relentless concert giving and travel and so on. And I had the time to sort of calibrate and rethink. And it struck me that the most important thing I could do with this new chapter, maybe the last chapter in my life, is to find my roots again. And that meant returning to Spring Head, which was the family home where I grew up, where I was born and grew up in, because it's got such a rich history. And it's a resource that I feel needs to be made broader and more accessible. I mean, as it is, the Spring Head Trust, which has been running it for the last 50 years, have done a fantastic job in drawing in children from different schools and for residential courses and one-day courses and so on, and giving them an experience of nature in the raw, but also domesticated nature, and how to grow plants, how to look after the soil, how to see the connections that there are in the different life systems that we have in the planet, and to take care of it, to be stewards of it. And it's a hugely valuable occupation and educational agenda. And it's something that I want, even though I'm not a trustee, I want to be part of and to attach as its motor a new musical ensemble. So my idea for the Spring Head Constellation, or the Constellation Choir and the Constellation Orchestra, is, yes, to do concerts on the international circuit as we've done before, but with less congestion, less pressure. Hopefully, that'll be difficult, but I think it's achievable. But also to link up with other organizations, educational organizations, that can feed into this overall sort of holistic concept of music and the arts needing to be actually regrounded in society and and to be connected also with the other great passion of my life, which is regenerative agriculture. So that may seem a bit far-fetched, but the two disciplines, that of music and of farming and agriculture, are curiously similar in a way. They face similar challenges in that the decision makings of how to calibrate the activities, how to create a business, first of all, but also how to set your targets, become very much the central focus of both activities. The really exciting thing is that we've already received a lot of invitations from promoters worldwide who really wish to buy into what we have to offer. And what do we have to offer? Well, a choir and an orchestra which will be composed of extremely dedicated and talented musicians of high standard, some of whom I've worked with in the past, and some will be new, and some will be coming from a completely fresh resource and origins. And I'm looking forward to the integration of them and to working in really a deep complicity with them in evolving how the constellation will emerge. And it won't be just a concert-giving organization. It will do concerts, and they'll be spaced out. I feel that there's a chance to reach areas that we haven't been able to reach in the past by a much greater connection with parallel art forms, particularly dance, but also new elements of music drama, which have been on the back burner up until now and are ready to really come into play. And this has been a dream of mine for a long, long time, to actually find a way of connecting different art forms, which are so often rigidified and limited by convention. And if there are projects, and they needn't be superhumanly expensive projects, but projects that grow from a sense that all the arts actually come from the same source, and that people's delectation of these arts is augmented by their coincidence, by their coming together. Then I think one's into a different realm of experience, potentially to enrich an audience experience and to enrich the participants. So I'm looking for different partners in the world of painting, of drama, of ballet, of sculpture, and also then connecting it back all the time to my other passion, being the care of the land and land husbandry, regenerative farming, and all the rest of it that goes together. The target is that there should be much more, not fake, but genuine interaction with audiences. It can take a number of different forms. It can be preparation of giving the context of the music that we're about to perform in the form of a lecture, or different spokespeople from the choir and the orchestra, or from me. Or it can be a kind of illustrative vignette of what the composer was up to, what was in his mind, insofar as one can reconstruct it. What were the parameters within which he was working? Because I mean, that's what's so fascinating about the music, because the music has to, at the time in the 17th century and the 18th century, had to comply and reflect the tastes of the person who's commissioning it, but it also had to express, or could express, the particular agenda of the composer. And it's finding that intersection point, what was imposed upon him or her, and what came from his guts and from his imagination. I have to say, I do warm particularly towards composers who in the past have shown a great passion for the countryside, for nature, for the rituals that go with nature and with the cycle of the seasons. And one of my favorite composers is Joseph Haydn, because he is really a countryman through and through, much more so than Mozart, who I equally adore. But Mozart is the city boy. He's the one who spent so much of his life in composing in a rattling carriage going from Prague to Vienna and back. Extraordinary. And you never feel with Mozart that he was particularly attuned to the countryside, unlike, say, Bach, who in his cantatas, the cantatas that we did in 2000 in the cantata Pilgrimage, are so obviously a reflection of the different festivities, both the Christian festivities and the kind of agricultural festivities of his day. And when he was composing in Leipzig, Leipzig was surrounded by countryside, and so one gets the wine harvest, one gets the lambing season, you get the sowing of the crops and so on, and the problems with arable weeds and everything. It all comes in as a symbol of Lutheran theology. And I think that there's a great deal that one can learn from these composers. I mean, when you get into the 19th century, it's of course romanticized hugely in terms of the magnificence and beauty of the Alps, and all the rituals that go with gnomes and the gods, and the romantic spirit. And then you get into the 20th century, and there's this great pastoral tradition that is prevalent in England particularly, and what I think, who was it? I think it was Constance Lambert referred to as English cowpat music, which I relate to. I think it's great, that whole concept. It doesn't have to be highfalutin or sanitized. And that's something that I really, really cherish. And I do think that the connections, these fundamental connections between art forms and nature are things that there's room to explore them in much more detail, much more profundity than I've been able to do in my life hitherto. I think for any musician, Christmas is such an iconic moment, and it's produced so much wonderful music in the past, and particularly in Bach's output. I mean, not besides the Christmas oratorio, the incredible concentration of magnificent cantatas that he wrote for Advent and then for Christmas Eve, right the way through to New Year and Epiphany. Astonishing, and he must have exhausted both himself and his kids, his children, and his charges at Leipzig by the almost relentless succession of cantatas that he composed for that season. And two of my very, very favorite works are Schwingt freudig euch empor, which is an Advent cantata, and it has this sense, even though it's the first Sunday in December, of renewal, of almost spring-like energy. And then Unser Mund sei voll Lachens, Cantata 110, which that's a genius of a piece, because he's taking an existing piece, the Fourth Suite in D major, that he wrote as an orchestral piece, and on top of that, in the most incredibly astute and clever way, he superimposes a chorus with words about our mouths shall be full of laughter at the prospect of Jesus coming to earth. And you'd think that those two things had never been separated, but one is actually added to the other, and only a brain and an imagination like his could achieve it. And suddenly the orchestral texture, which is joyous anyway, is lifted onto a completely different level by the laughter from the choir. And that's, to me, is absolutely essential and emblematic of how the two things come together, how an orchestra can, with a bit of effort and imagination, imitate the sounds of a choir, and how a choir can emulate the virtuosity and the ease and proficiency of an orchestra. And when they come together, it's not just 2 + 2, it's 150. And then there's the Messe de Minuit by Charpentier. And Charpentier, to me, is a fascinating composer, because he's so much under the shadow of Lully. Lully did his utmost to keep Charpentier out of the court circle and to really shackle him in the most unfair way. And Charpentier, to me, is got a completely different talent to Lully. Lully is brilliant at finding a way of making music, even if it's not of the greatest quality, that it serves the theatre, serves the stage brilliantly. Charpentier is much more of a pure musician, and he's somebody that also delves deeply into his past and to the past traditions of the church, in that his whole mass for Christmas Eve is actually based on Christmas carols, on French Christmas carols, very different from German or English Christmas carols come to that. And even when he's on to difficult subject matter, like Credo in unum Deum, I believe in God, and all the difficult things that you're required to believe in as a Christian, he makes it sound easy, he makes it sound joyous. And that's gives a totally different flavor to the sort of Lutheran earnestness of Bach, but also it's similar to, in a way, or it's complementary to Bach's joyousness as well. Last June, we were involved in a really stimulating project, which was to join up Monteverdi's music with that of the painting of Caravaggio. And we did it mostly in the Galleria Borghese in Rome, where there are 5 fantastic pictures of Caravaggio, and we were able to match the music of Monteverdi of related subjects to the pictures and film them there. And in that gallery are also the amazing statues of Bernini, and they are just heart-stopping in their beauty and in their construction. But the thing is, they don't change. You walk around it, you walk around a Bernini statue, and it's the same all the time. And the same goes for Caravaggio's paintings, but Monteverdi's music is changing every moment. That's the defining thing about music, that it's elusive. It's like catching or trying to catch the soap in the bath. It just eludes you if you're not careful. But golly, it's exciting when it happens. You can't push and pull an artwork, absolutely. But that's behind given me the idea to writing the book that I'm absolutely up to my neck in trying to complete at the moment, which is called Monteverdi and his Constellation. And the Constellation stands for a generation of exceptional artists, painters, and scientists who were all born in the 1560s or 70s, an extraordinary sort of concentration of genius, really, because, I mean, a lot of them are household names, people like Shakespeare, Galileo, Kepler, Caravaggio, Francis Bacon, Rubens, and Monteverdi, who's perhaps the odd one out in being much less known to the general art world. And it's really only been in the last 50 years, really, that Monteverdi has really moved center stage in people's comprehension of the music of the past. And he's the one, certainly in my book, who is the closest to us in that he seems to be addressing us very, very personally. It seems so modern. His whole aim being to encapsulate the whole gamut of human emotions in music in a way that music never was supposed to do in the immediate generation before him. If you think of Palestrina particularly, the perfection of Palestrina's music is there to reflect the Godhead and the beauty of the heavens. Monteverdi is all about how we adjust to the Godhead, how we adjust to each other in society, how we relate, how our loves and our hates are all part of the fabric of human life, and how that can be expressed in music. And of course, painters like Caravaggio, and to an extent Rubens, are doing something very similar. And the whole purpose of this book is to compare what I think are essentially similar targets being striven for by all these different men of genius. And to me, it's highly significant that both Galileo and Kepler studied music and were musically competent. And Galileo was a composer, apart from his father. He wrote a Ricercare for lute, which is really rather good. Kepler wrote the harmony of the universe. So his whole cosmology was based on harmonic proportion and on musical proportion, and that was the language. It was the lingua franca of the day. And then if you turn to Caravaggio, you find how many of his early paintings are of musicians, of boys singing or playing the lute and so on. And it seems to me unjust that music has been sort of sidelined or pushed to the margins, instead of being absolutely central to the center of a constellation. So that's, and then also think of how important music is in Shakespeare, both when he runs out of juice, you could say, when his iambic pentameter and when his poetic discourse needs something additional and he turns to music, but also in the sense that the structure of his poetry, of his sonnets, of his soliloquies in Hamlet and Macbeth and so on, are so musical, intrinsically musical, in the sense that they have a sonic shape, and they profit from the contrast between the different vowel colours of Elizabethan and Jacobean English, which is so beautiful. Of these 7 extraordinary men who were all born within 10 years of one another, how many of them actually knew each other? It's difficult to say. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I think scholars would agree that Shakespeare and Bacon knew each other, and they had a spiritual godfather in Montaigne, the great French essayist. Rubens clearly adored Caravaggio and learnt a great deal from him. Because when Rubens was hired by Vincenzo Gonzaga, the Duke of Mantua, to be his court painter, one of the first things he did is say, I want leave, I want to go to Rome. And so he went to Rome to study ancient statuary. But one of the things that he came across was Caravaggio's paintings, and particularly the paintings that had been rejected by the church as being too vulgar or too explicit or too risque. And there's a really good incident of this, in that the Death of the Virgin, which is a remarkable painting by Caravaggio, was rejected by the Dominican friars, and Rubens sent a fax or sent an email to Vincenzo Gonzaga and said, "I think we should buy this," and he bought it, took it to Mantua. He revered it enormously. And then when Mantua was sacked in the 1620, Rubens was then in contact with James I in England and said, "Look, I think there's a good painting here you should have." And he probably took a commission on it and got it to the palace in Whitehall. And then what happened to James's son, Charles I, 1649, he was dead, and so Louis XIV got it. So that's why it's in the Louvre today, and it's all, in a way, through the connections of Rubens with Caravaggio and the sense of complicity that he, even though he was a very different painter from Caravaggio, of the sense of a lineage there, of a real bond. But the tie-up that I find really fascinating, and this is purely fictitious, it's out of my own dotty imagination, is in 1604, when Monteverdi and Rubens and Galileo were all momentarily together in Mantua. Rubens had just been recruited. He'd been there for 3 years or 4 years. Monteverdi had been there for 20 or more. Galileo was prospecting, was sniffing around, looking for a different type of job as a military engineer. And he couldn't come to terms with Vincenzo Gonzaga. But I imagine the three of them, because Mantua being such a two-horse town, a small town dominated by this huge Palazzo Ducale, ducal palace, they must have met in the town square or at a concert that Monteverdi was giving. And then they went off to the pub together, to an enoteca, and sat down and chewed the cud together and compared their experiences, their life experiences and their targets. And it just gave me a wonderful excuse to fantasize about what were the points of common, what would they really have been interested to discuss and to exchange ideas about. So that's a fictitious chapter that I've written, a pure fiction. The thing is, one can never actually put the clock back and undo the things that one has done. One can regret them. One can go through a period of deep reflection and remorse. And I certainly did that after the incident in La Côte Saint-André last August, in August 23. But certain things come out of it. I mean, I immediately realized that I'd made a huge error of judgment, that I'd lost self-control. And one of the first things that I vowed to myself was that I'd never put myself under that, or other people under that pressure again, because I was really completely unfit to have conducted that concert. I was totally exhausted and empty, running on empty. And this is not an excuse, but I just want to make sure that I don't ever get into that situation again, and to put so many innocent people at risk, and to disappoint them profoundly. And I realized very quickly that I needed to do a number of things, and one of them was to have a very in-depth medical assessment, and the other thing was to go into a range of therapies that I'd never done before. I'd had a Jungian psychiatrist before, but this was new, that to go into cognitive behavioral therapy, to go into anger management, to go into psychiatry in quite a different way, and also examples of beneficent leadership training, which has helped me enormously. It's an ongoing process. It's not as if I could say, well, it's all done now, I'm going to be fine. It'll continue. But it certainly got me to a position where I feel I've got a much better grasp of the relationship of me as a conductor to other musicians, and what was acceptable or at least tolerated in the past is completely unacceptable now. And I'm hugely grateful that realization has come to pass. The reaction of many of the musicians, I mean, the vast majority of the musicians whom I've worked with has been, yes, you did some damn stupid things, but we still want to work with you. And that we're involved in a society where, naming and blaming is so prevalent now that it's unnuanced. It doesn't have any subtlety about it anymore. And I would love to see that will gradually change, and that there is room for people being given a second chance if they deserve it. And some people say I don't deserve it, but others think that I do, and that I've still got something to give. And I know that what I've got a hunger to give is to impart the lessons I've learned to a younger generation, and to help them to leap over the problems that I've had to negotiate painfully in the course of my career. Some people will find that very easy. Some may find it helpful to have somebody who's been through the war zone and come out the other side to help them a bit. I'm very conscious of the fact that over a period of nearly 60 years, I've been privileged to be supported by an incredible group of loyal patrons and trustees and enthusiasts who have taken a leap of faith in the project, some of which were definitely grandiose and probably hubristic, and supported me through them. I mean, I'm thinking of in the 1990s of the Mozart operas, the 7 great mature Mozart operas, which we did one a year, and that was hugely enlightening and a wonderful experience, and it'll never be lost in my mind anyway. And a lot of the participants still talk about it, and the audiences. And then the other huge project, which I found almost beyond imagining in terms of its outreach, and it was the Bach Cantata Pilgrimage in the year 2000, when we did 89 concerts of all the Bach cantatas all across Europe, north, south, east, west, and then ended up in New York. I do feel that there has been, in a way, a retrenchment or a slight handbrake on the projects that I would have loved to have done, and that there's a new opportunity in this new chapter in my life to be unfettered, to be freer, and to have a chance to really give full rein to what I think is the incredible talent that is there within the group, and the musicians who've already shown their willingness and their enthusiasm to join in the projects that I'm trying to outline before them, and then that is a huge refreshment in itself, and an opportunity which has not been around before. So that's all very exciting and very, very new. One of the things that I've regretted a bit in the past is, and it comes from specialization, that as soon as you start using period instruments, you're locked into a particular period, obviously, and then if you want to then add a different element or a different style to it, you either have to change instruments or you have to compromise in some way. That's the downside. The upside, of course, is that the understanding that I think I share with a lot of my colleagues and musicians, which is that the closer you can get to the sound world, the particular sound world of a composer, the more he or she comes to life and comes to address us paradoxically, because we're not trying to dress them up or dress up his or her music in a 21st century style. You're trying to get back to a sound that was familiar to audiences when they first heard that music, even though we hear that music with different ears. And I believe that very profoundly. I mean, there are people like Richard Taruskin who thinks it's a whole lot of nonsense, that it's a modern construct, and he may be right to an extent. And he might also say, in a provocative way, that what I'm now intending to do, which is to override that by putting in quite opposite styles of music in the same program, as being a proof that the initial effort was flawed in the first place. I don't look at it that way, but I do feel very enthusiastic about matching opposites, matching very big contrasts of style and sound. I mean, even if you just take in the context of French music, I mean, to be able to perform in the same program, say, a Requiem by Campra, who's an early 18th century composer, with the Fauré Requiem, which was written at the end of the 19th century, and use different instruments at the break, at the interval, change instruments, is a very stimulating and new way of doing things. I've got a whole program which I'm particularly keen to do with Constellation Choir and Orchestra, which is of wedding music, and it climaxes with Stravinsky's fantastic choral ballet Les Noces. But it's preceded by works by Monteverdi, by Johann Christoph Bach, and somebody else, I can't remember, some of the mid-18th century composer, to give a whole range of different colours of approaches to the concept of weddings and marital celebrations through different eyes, through different ears of composers. So that's the kind of thing I'm interested to do. Yes, and of course there's still the Himalayas still to climb, the B minor mass, which is always there, and I always wanted to have a go at it every few years. But there's also, I mean, with Beethoven Year coming up, there's a chance to do what I missed this last year, the chance to do the complete Beethoven Symphony Cycle with the Constellation Choir and Orchestra, and I'm really thrilled about that.